What's up YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Joey. I'm a longtime competitive card game player, and in today's video I want to take all the battlefields from set 1 Origins of Riftbound League of Legends TCG and rank them in this tier list. Now I know usually tier list content is referred to as slop nowadays, and people aren't always wrong when they say that. However, I do think there's some value to be had from a video like this, especially for players that are new to the game. Maybe they're not sure how to evaluate the power of a battlefield, and this video will hopefully help players determine what battlefields they should consider playing in their decks versus maybe which ones they should avoid out of their packs. So with that being said, let's get right into the categories. The first one being every legend can play me. These are the battlefields that are just strong enough where every single strategy, kind of regardless of archetype, should consider playing this battlefield. The next category is needed in my archetype. So if you are playing a specific strategy, which we'll talk about, you absolutely need to play this battlefield in that specific strategy. The next category is playable in my archetype, which is a battlefield you could consider playing if you're playing a certain archetype, but you might not need to play it overall if there are just better options. Too niche means it's probably just not quite the format for the battlefield, but there may be some minor use cases. And finally, we have unplayable, which it's just not the right format for it. This battlefield is probably not going to really see play. And the thing to note here is this is just the beginning of testing for set 1 Origins of Riftbound. I think we're going to see things shake up quite a bit between the Chinese release of the game and then a few months down the road when the game releases more globally. I think there will definitely be things to change in this tier list, so maybe we can revisit it in a future video. But overall, I'm thinking about doing more tier list content if you guys want it. I was thinking about maybe ranking the commons in Origins and then going through all the different rarities so you guys know which ones to really look out for. Or I was thinking about doing just maybe rankings based on cards within their respective colors. So if you guys want to see a specific format for these videos going forward, let me know in the comments. But let's go ahead and start with our first battlefield, which is Altar to Unity. So Altar to Unity says when you hold here, play a 1 might recruit token in your base. Now this battlefield I personally feel goes between needed in my archetype and every legend can play me. For the case of every legend can play me, I think that it's just generally good to start accruing more units into your base, but I do think there are better generic options that will outclass this in an everyday strategy. So I'm going to go ahead and say this is needed in my archetype, mainly for Victor, and there may be some other decks that want to include this card, but for right now I'm going to say this is needed in mostly just the Victor archetype. Next up, we have Aspirant's Climb, which says increase the points needed to win the game by 1. This battlefield is perfect for any deck that wants to go into the long game, mainly those Volibear and Misfortune decks that are revolving around Dazzling Aurora, because you want to get to the late game, get the value off of Aurora by playing a ton of units for free, and win the game there. And you basically want to ward off those aggro decks that are trying to win the game much faster. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and put probably needed in my archetype. Maybe in the future when formats become slower, if they ever do, you wouldn't really need this card because you don't have the threat of someone ending the game on you too quickly. But there are some decent aggro decks in what seems to be the beginning of this format for Riftbound. So I would say that these long game decks, these control decks, really do need Aspirant's Climb at the moment. Next up, we have Back Alley Bar, which says when a unit moves from here, give it +1 this turn. So the couple of applications for this card are if you have a ganking card or if you're playing Misfortune and can give a card ganking. When you gank over the other battlefield, you're going to get +1, which can be good. This can also give you a +1 if you move a unit from here to your base. That's not always going to be super relevant though. I guess it can help dodge some forms of base removal. But really, I feel like this card kind of borders between too niche and unplayable. I think, again, there are maybe Misfortune builds that could utilize this, but I think there's going to be better and more easily usable battlefield effects that you want to take advantage of. So for now, I think I'm going to put this in too niche. It might move down to unplayable for the current format though. Next up is Bandal Tree, which lets you hide 1 additional hidden card here. Of course, this is just absolutely 100% needed in Teemo. I don't know that any other decks will really end up playing this card. I'm sure there'll be more hidden strategies in the future with more set releases, but for right now, Teemo is the only one that's playing a super overabundance of hiddens, so 100% needed in that archetype. Then there's Fortified Position, which grants a shield 2 to any defending unit at this battlefield. I think a lot of people look at this and immediately say needed in my archetype in Master Yi, but to be completely honest with you, I think this is a battlefield that every single legend can play because the game is just so new and so in its infancy that gaining pure stats is just good almost no matter what deck you're playing. I don't think control decks would necessarily want to play this because you're probably not playing too many early units that could take advantage of it, but just about any aggro, any mid-range deck wants to play this card to just make it harder for your opponent to take control of that battlefield from you. So I really think this is one that every single legend can consider playing and probably get away with. For Godwillow's Grove, when you hold here, draw 1. I would like to say every legend can play me because the effect is just so good. Getting draws is invaluable in a game like this, but I don't think it's going to be that great for the aggro decks that just throw a little weenie in there that is not really going to be able to hold all that well. So I do think this is going to be more suited for archetypes, specifically like Master Yi and Ari, and maybe some other decks that are a little bit better at holding battlefields. I don't think every single deck is going to be able to really get the most value out of this card, especially again those aggro decks that just play 2/2s that are going to get run over the next time their opponent moves a battle card up. Next up is Hollowed Tomb. When you hold here, you may return your chosen champion from your trash to your champion zone if it is empty. I know there's been a lot of rules conversation about this card. I don't think we've gotten clarity on it yet, but if we have, let me know in the comments below. Basically, the question for this card is your chosen champion the one singular copy that you put in your champion zone exactly, and then any other main deck copies don't apply for this thing's effect? Or if you put, let's say, Misfortune Buccaneer in your champion zone, is every single copy of Misfortune Buccaneer qualified to interact with this battlefield? That's the main question. I don't know if we've gotten an answer to that. I feel like it would be way too complicated to try to track down the one exact copy of the chosen champion you put in your chosen champion area at the beginning of the game. So I lean on the side of it's probably going to apply to any card that has the same name as the chosen champion that you selected, the same exact color and name. But really, regardless of that though, I don't think this card is too great at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and place it in too niche. I think this card can see some play in decks that really just play like a one of chosen champion that they may want to recycle in some matchups, but I don't think it's going to be good enough to warrant playing in most decks or even in most archetypes. I think it's going to be a very niche thing that some specific builds of some specific decks want to play once in a while. The next battlefield is Monastery of Hirana. When you conquer here, you may spend a buff to draw 1. So I'm going to go ahead and place this right in playable in my archetype, and those main archetypes being probably Lee Sin and Set. Maybe you can consider Leona, although getting her buffs is a lot more conditional, so I don't think this battlefield would be the best for her. But when it comes to Lee Sin, when it comes to Set, you can spend those buffs that you generate rather easily to draw cards. But there is the question though, do you really want to be spending your buffs for this when there's so many other spend buff effects in your deck that you have to manage already? I don't know if that's going to end up proving true. So for right now, the card's of course playable in those archetypes, but I don't know if it's going to be an auto include right now. Similar to the Monastery, we have Nvori Fighting Pit, but instead what it does is when you hold here, you may buff a unit here. I think this card is probably going to be needed in the Set archetype. If you have it out there on the board, it's going to just be one of the most consistent ways you can generate buffs. And if you don't have a lot of buff generators in your hand, you're going to be very happy that you had this battlefield out during the game. Although because a battlefield is only usable once per game in a best of 3, of course you don't want to build your deck to have to rely on it, but I do think it's going to be one of those battlefields that in a best of 3 Set is going to want to see throughout the match to make those buffs a little bit easier to obtain. Next up is Oblisk of Power. Now this one's tricky. Simply just gives both players an extra rune to start with. That's one thing you have to consider with any battlefield. It's usually a two-way street where your opponent will also benefit from whatever the battlefield is granting, right? So Oblisk of Power, I can see arguments for a couple different categories here. You would say every legend can play me because it just seems good to start with a mana up in every single game. Although again, keep in mind your opponent's also getting that extra mana, so could be a little bit risky there. You could say needed in my archetype for those, once again, late game dazzling Aurora decks like Misfortune and Volley Bear, but those decks already ramp. So do you want to ramp your opponent when your deck's already built to do that? I'm almost going to lean towards playable in my archetype because I have seen a lot of arguments from the MF and Volley Bear players saying my deck already does this. Why do I want to give my opponent extra mana to play with? That is a very, in my opinion, logical and reasonable approach to take, where you want to increase your chances of winning as much as you can. So if your deck already does the thing, if your deck already ramps up, why would you want to give your opponent more resources to work with when they can potentially beat you faster? I know obviously you can get to Aurora faster, but you might just want to rely on what your main deck can do to get there. instead of giving your opponent somewhat of a leg up here. So I'm going to say playable in my archetype. I certainly wouldn't blame any ramp decks for playing this battlefield, but I don't know if it's 100% needed when things get a little bit more optimized. Then there's Reavers Row. When you defend here, you may move a friendly unit here to base. I'm going to go ahead and say every legend can play me, although there's going to be a little bit of a caveat because once again, you got to keep in mind your opponent is going to have the same opportunity to defend their units with this card as you do. So I don't think every legend will play this card no matter what. I think there is just the potential though, if you are playing a deck where you realize I kind of want to preserve my units, they die to battle a little bit easily, Reavers Row can be that great option for you. It's generic enough where certainly every leader could consider it for that utility, but I think if you're playing a battle heavy deck where you want to be taking over battlefields and you want to be killing things in battle, you don't want to give your opponent the opportunity to use Reavers Row. So there's a little bit of a caveat there, but certainly it is generic enough and has enough utility where every legend could consider the card for sure. Now here's one of the coolest battlefields in my opinion, Reckers Arena. When you hold here, activate the conquer effects of units here. There's so many good conquer effects. Kaisa Survivor, look at Kiana. These are effects that would generate you so much value if they hold. And the hardest thing about their effects is their conquer abilities. So you want to retreat them and then try to conquer again the following turn. That takes 3 total turns of getting all that done. So having the opportunity to proc a conquer effect turn after turn is really cool. However, I think the problem with this battlefield is if you don't build your deck in a super specific way to really take advantage of this battlefield, it's going to be vanilla more often than not, and you want to avoid that. So I'm going to go ahead and say playable in my archetype if the build is really revolving around proccing this and using a lot of conquer effects. That's where I think this is going to shine the most. Next up is Sigil of the Storm. When you conquer here, recycle one of your runes. This is really just playable in Volibear, who gets extra runes usually every single turn. So the main use of this card is to act as a detriment to your opponent that probably isn't generating extra runes. They are going to be less likely to want to conquer that battlefield because the downside is much more negative for them than it is for you. However, once again, I don't know if it's necessarily needed in Volibear. It'll be good for those players that are really good at rune resource management and want to punish their opponents for playing poorly. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and throw it in playable in my archetype. On a similar note, next up is StarTip Peak. When you hold here, you may channel 1 rune exhausted. This battlefield seems amazing in theory. Every deck would love to just get extra runes to play with, but not every deck is fantastic at holding battlefields. Once again, this is going to be a battlefield that I think is not going to be super playable in aggro decks like Jinx, like Darius, maybe some other ones. Of course, it's going to be fantastic in holding based decks like Master Yi, Ahri, and maybe a few others. So for that reason, I'm probably going to say either playable or needed in my archetype. I don't know if StarTip Peak is necessarily needed in Yi or Ahri. It's definitely nice to have. So I think for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and say playable in my archetype. Any hold-based strategy can definitely consider this if you want to maybe be a little bit more greedy on power costs and generate more runes back after that. Argons Peak, when you conquer here, ready 2 runes at the end of this turn. 100% every legend can play me. There's going to really be application for just about every single deck with this card because almost every single deck is playing at least action speed spells where you want to be interrupting your opponent when they attack you, even if you're in an aggro deck, even if you're in a control deck and a mid-range deck. So I think this card is a really cool option to have. Again, got to keep in mind your opponent's going to have equal opportunity to get those untapped runes and use those battle tricks as well, so you got to be pretty smart about how you use it, but very good card for just about any leader in the game. Arena's greatest. At the start of each player's first beginning phase, that player gains 1 point, 110% necessary in pretty much all aggressive builds. You don't want to lose those Aurora decks. You don't want to lose to Volibear. You don't want to lose those control decks or Teemo. You want to try to score up on them as fast as you physically can. This literally just says deal your opponent a damage if the game revolved around damage. So really good card for aggro decks. Not much else to say there, honestly. Candlelit Sanctum, one of my favorite design battlefields. When you conquer here, look at the top 2 cards of your main deck. You may recycle one or both of them. Put those that you don't back in any order. A little bit of a weird wording at the end there, but 100% every legend can play Candlelit Sanctum. It's just a great card for increasing the consistency of your deck, which sometimes this game can have problems with consistency because we don't draw that many in our opening hand and not every deck has great access to draw power. So a really cool card for being able to just fix your next draw, which is cool. But I do think this card is going to be oftentimes overshadowed by some of the other more generic options that give you more immediate value. Let's say Fortified Position or Argons Peak, but still an incredibly good generic battlefield. For Dreaming Tree, the first time you choose a friendly unit with a spell here each turn, draw 1. This is actually a very good battlefield in the right archetype. The reason I say that is because in the right matchups, this can be a very one-sided battlefield, where if you play a lot of battle spells like Ahri or Master Yi that target your own units and your opponent's playing a deck that maybe doesn't quite do that, you're going to be generating all the draws off of this and not really worried about your opponent putting units in this battlefield. So very good. I wouldn't quite say every legend can play me, because not every deck or legend plays the combat tricks that would target their own units. So I'm going to go ahead and probably say needed in my archetype for, again, those decks like Ahri. Not even necessarily needed in Master Yi, because I think there are 3 better battlefields that Master Yi could play. But I do think in Ahri, this is going to be a battlefield you probably want to play almost 100%. Next up is Grand Plaza. When you hold here, if you have 7+ units, you win the game. Now, I had made a comment about this card a few videos ago where I had said I had a funny realization that I had literally never seen a Victor deck win by resolving this card. That was before the full totality of Origins reveals. Now there are some pretty nutty Victor decks running out there using some baited hook shenanigans and some other things that are able to spam like an insane amount of tokens that you almost wouldn't believe if you haven't seen it yet. So this card definitely a little bit more playable. I'm probably going to go ahead and say playable in my archetype, which is only exactly Victor. Before these new shenanigans were revealed, I would have definitely put too niche or even borderline unplayable. There's always the threat of it, right? If you're playing Victor and you put this battlefield down, your opponent has to respect it. They can't let your base or your battlefields get too far out of control, but you just weren't spamming enough up until this point with all the new reveals. Now you kind of are, and it's going to be pretty crazy when this card resolves and you just automatically win the game. I think it's the only other automatic win condition in the game besides just scoring points normally. So pretty crazy. I don't know if every single build of Victor will go for it, though, because there are just other battlefields that give you immediate value, which could lead to you winning the game more efficiently. That might be a thing, but time will tell. Funnily enough, though, I think Trifarian War Camp is 100% more vital in Victor than Grand Plaza is, because when you're spamming so many tokens, you just get multiplicative amounts of power when you're throwing each and every single one of them into this battlefield, getting a +1 every single time. It's just so crazy good that I think Victor almost has to play this card, and I do think other aggro decks like Jinx, like Darius, and a few others can benefit from going really wide into this battlefield and beating out their opponents in terms of just raw might. I'm going to go ahead and say Biomaw's Lair is probably the most underexplored battlefield right now. Units can't move from here to base. It's interesting, right? Because when you put a unit up there, it gets locked in place, and that can really lead to a lot of difficult navigating when you're trying to play around that. Do you want to conquer it and then lose out on the potential of ever really getting that unit back to go elsewhere or to fight elsewhere? It is a pretty interesting mind game. I just don't know if it's all that great right now, because it's only going to be playable in the perfect strategy for it, and I just don't really see that existing right now. I think this is going to be the first one that's going to go in unplayable. Really cool concept once again, and I'm sure someone will crack the code on this card. I don't know if it'll be set 1, but that's my read on it for now. Then there is Voidgate, 100% playable in several archetypes. Of course, there is Kaisa. Of course, there's Teemo, which can get some crazy procs off this card. And then Lux, which also has a lot of power damage-based spells. So for sure, playable in those archetypes. I don't know if this is necessarily needed in those archetypes, but definitely very good. Makes your opponent second guessing if they actually want to conquer it, because you might get way more value out of your removal spells if they do. Windswept Helllock, 100% every single legend can play this card. Just having the ability to gank over to the other battlefield if a unit holds is just really good for scoring additional points. Really generic, really strong. And then Zon Warren's, once again, totally every single legend can play this card. It's just going to be allowing you to cycle through your deck. There are going to be some decks that actually want cards in the trash without having to play them first, like Immortal Phoenix strategies are really good with that. Some of these yellow revival or purple revival units want some cards in the trash, and you can set this up with Zon Warren's. So overall, very good. So just doing a quick look back through this tier list, I generally think this is what it looks like for the most part, again, in the early days of Riftbound Origins. The only questionable ones, the 2 niche and unplayable. I don't know if I'm just missing something on Biomaw's Lair. And the Hollow Tombs, I definitely think could live down here, but there may be some decks that just really want to recycle that one of Chosen Champion and get some use out of it. But overall, guys, I'd love to know in the comments below, what do you think? What did I get right? Let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.